Senator from Washington.
Are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I suggest that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Democrats have been very clear. We have 5 bills in this package we would be happy to pass today on their own. We are all in agreement on funding for child care, cancer research, air traffic controllers, our troops, and more. But we have also been clear that we cannot and will not move the DHS bill without real progress on accountability. ICE and CBP are out of control, and we cannot approve that bill until common sense reforms are included. That's what the vast majority of American people are demanding, and many Republicans now also say that must happen as well. So Congress, all of us need to act. Peaceful protesters and American citizens are being targeted, detained, attacked, and killed. We have to say no to what this president is doing. So while I am very glad to see the White House and Republicans are now talking with Democrats to finalize a plan to pass the 5 bills and split off DHS, until that deal is finalized, I will be a no on this vote. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call in relation to the motion to proceed to calendar number 302, H.R. 7148.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to be permitted to complete my remarks before the vote begins.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to vote to end debate on the motion to proceed to the 6-bill package of appropriations legislation sent to us by the House of Representatives. These are fiscally responsible funding bills that reflect months of hard work and deliberation and contributions from members of both parties and on both sides of the Capitol. I would like to take a few moments to highlight some of the key aspects of these bills. Let's begin with the funding for the Department of Defense. This legislation provides U.S. military services with the funding needed to deter China and Russia, supports our service members and their families, and strengthens the defense industrial base. It addresses major funding gaps across the board, such as in shipbuilding. The bill provides a critical down payment toward an additional DDG-51, the workhorse of the U.S. surface fleet, and invest in additional Columbia and Virginia-class submarines. Mr. President, the bill also provides multi-year procurement authority for critical munitions production, a priority for the President. It funds drone and counter-drone technologies, which, as we've learned in both Ukraine and Israel, are increasingly changing the nature of the battlefield. And it contains security cooperation with close allies and partners whose growing defense capabilities are force multipliers for the United States and contribute to the deterrence of shared adversaries. This is especially true of our NATO allies, who are increasing their own domestic levels of military investment at the push and encouragement of President Trump, and appropriately so. Finally, the defense bill invests in our most precious asset, the men and women of our armed forces. The bill fully funds the 3.8% pay raise for service members and the additional pay raise for our junior enlisted service members, showing our commitment to their readiness, well-being, and mission success. The second bill is the National Security Department of State and Related Programs Bill. It used to be known as the State Foreign Operations Bill. It contains security assistance for key allies and partners, including Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Taiwan, and the Philippines. The bill also supports important global health programs. It continues support for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, known as PEPFAR, which has saved a remarkable 26 million lives since 2003, including the lives of 8 million babies born to HIV-infected mothers. Mr. President, it's difficult for me to contemplate another global health program, and we have many good ones, that has had more of a positive impact than PEPFAR. In many ways, I think it was President George W. Bush's greatest legacy. Turning to the labor HHS bill, this appropriations would prioritize funding to help make Americans healthier, and it robustly funds life-saving biomedical research. This has been a top priority of mine, and I know of many other members as well, including the subcommittee chair, Shelley Capito, and her ranking member, Tammy Baldwin. Funding for NIH is not decreased as was proposed in the administration's budget. Rather, it is increased by $415 million, including increases of $100 million for Alzheimer's research and $10 million more for diabetes research, with a focus on type 1 diabetes. This bill also makes critical investments in our nation's children and families and invests in America's workforce. It includes funding for child care programs to help low-income working families and for apprenticeship programs to help us reach the goal of 1 million new active apprentices. The bill also includes more funding for low-income heating assistance, which is absolutely crucial for states like Maine and is an issue that I have worked for years on with my Democratic colleague, Jack Reed of Rhode Island. The Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill focuses on our most pressing transportation challenges, including modernizing our nation's outdated air traffic system, and I give Secretary Duffy a great deal of credit for coming up with a workable, much-needed plan in that area. It would also address the air traffic controller shortage and provides a pay raise there as well. The bill invests in critical infrastructure like our roads, bridges, ports, and rail. At the same time, the appropriations will continue to fully fund existing rental assistance for more than 4.6 million households to ensure that seniors, the disabled individuals, and working families who currently receive such assistance are not put at risk of homelessness. The Financial Services and General Government Bill funds core government functions. It increases funding for taxpayer services at the IRS, reallocates resources to strengthen court security, and helps keep our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., safe for both residents and visitors. Mr. President, as the Vice Chair of the committee has mentioned, there has understandably been a great deal of attention focused on the Homeland Security portion of the package, given the events of the past week. The horrific shooting death of Alex Petrie must be thoroughly and impartially investigated. and President Trump has promised that it will be investigated both impartially and thoroughly. The Homeland Security Funding Bill includes important provisions that we put in during the negotiations that would make such incidents less likely to occur. For example, it includes $20 million for body-worn cameras, which help to protect both law enforcement officials and those with whom they are interacting. It includes $2 million to ensure that training requirements include how to de-escalate an encounter with protesters. Yet another important provision of the bill empowers the Inspector General to review and investigate detention centers. These are all critical reforms, but it does not mean that we cannot do more. But to do more, Mr. President, we need to get onto the bill so that we can make the critical decisions that are being negotiated by leadership in both the House and the Senate and the White House as to how we proceed. Do we split off the Homeland Security bill and pass the other 5, and put Homeland Security on a continuing resolution, which will, by the way, delay implementation of the 3 reforms that I just discussed? Or do we try to amend that part of the bill with the agreed upon additional precautions and safeguards? Can't do that if we don't get onto the package. It's also worth noting, Mr. President, that more than 80% of the funding in the Homeland Security bill is for non-immigration and border security functions. For example, 35% of the funding in the Homeland Security bill is for FEMA. And think about what FEMA is doing on the ground right now due to this horrific storm that we have experienced. It includes $35 billion for FEMA to help state and local governments prepared to respond to disasters, including funding for programs that help local law enforcement and our firefighters that are so important. It includes funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program that helps organizations like synagogues, churches, temples, and mosques protect themselves from terrorism. Mr. President, another important component of this bill supports our Coast Guard. Think of our Coast Guard personnel out in this terrible weather, being available to rescue our fishermen, our lobstermen, or others who are in trouble. The Coast Guard provides critical safety, security, and stewardship functions from Maine to the Caribbean to the Arctic and myriad places in between. The bill provides funding to secure our borders and to stop the flow of illegal drugs, money, weapons, and people being trafficked into our country by cartels and transnational criminal organizations. It includes funding for TSA to help keep Americans safe while they travel, as well as funding for a 3.8% pay raise for air traffic controllers to help address the serious workforce shortage that also can affect air safety. Mr. President, my hope is that we can come up with an agreement that allows us to proceed to this bill and to provide some additional safeguards. And those negotiations are underway right now. But if we don't get on to this package, We cannot change this package. And I think that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle need to recognize and acknowledge that. So I want to end by noting the tremendous work of the full committee staff, my staff, and Senator Murray's staff. I particularly want to acknowledge the hard work of Betsy McDonald, who has worked night and day as the staff director. I want to thank our subcommittee chairs and ranking members and their staff who have worked so diligently and are so dedicated. I know the conversations are continuing even as we speak between the administration and Congress on how to complete action on the Homeland Security portion of this package. This morning's vote is about taking the first step, not the final step, to consider the package on the Senate floor. So I urge my colleagues to support cloture on the motion to proceed to this vital appropriations package. Thank you, Mr. President.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 302, H.R. 7148, an act making further consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 7148, an act making consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes shall be brought to a close. Yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Brett, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Banks, Capito, Cassidy, Collins, Cornyn, Daines, Grassley, Hyde-Smith, Mullen, Rounds, Sheehy, Wicker. Senators voting in the negative: Cantwell, Gillibrand, Hassan, Hickenlooper, Murray, Padilla, Peters, Reed, Schatz, Smith. Mr. Kelly, no. Ms. Blunt-Rochester, no. Mr. Thune. Aye. Mr. Johnson, no. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Moreno, aye. Mr. King, no. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Wyden, no.
Friends. There's no friendship.
Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Kramer, aye. Ms. Ernst, aye. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Young, aye.
Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. McCormick, aye.
No.
Mr. Tuberville, no. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Budd, no. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Gallego, no. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Welch, Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Scott of Florida, no. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Kim, no. Mr. Heinrich, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Langford, aye. Mrs. Moody, no. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Markey, no. Ms. Lummis, aye. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Moran, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Warnock, no. Ms. Warren, no. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Ms. Rosen. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 45, the nays are 55. 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn, not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is
Mr.
recognized.
President, I enter a motion to reconsider.
The motion is entered.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nearly a year ago, Secretary Noem visited western North Carolina to see the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene firsthand. That day, the Secretary told the crowd in Bat Cave, North Carolina, that, I quote, "The previous administration failed in many areas, and we're going to learn from that and do better." A sentiment that I shared wholeheartedly. Secretary Noem highlighted some of the actions taken in the early days of President Trump's second term to remove all the red tape that previously slowed the department down and western North Carolina's recovery. These actions were sorely needed, and I fully supported what she intended to do. Earlier this week, now let's fast forward a year. Earlier this week, the New York Times reported that approximately $17 billion, with a B, in federal disaster funds for states has been delayed over the past year. The article states the delays stem from a directive issued by Ms. Noem in June that said any expenditure over $100,000 or more must be approved by her office, which oversees the disaster agency, to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. The bottleneck includes money that already had been approved by regional FEMA offices for things like debris removal and repairs to roads, bridges, water, and sewer systems. This is being delayed, folks. This new reporting sadly confirms what the people of western North Carolina have known for the past year. Mr. President, this chart shows a comparison between FEMA obligations and outlays in Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence under President Trump in his first term. The obligations and outlays to date for Hurricane Helene under the second Trump administration are these marks. Down here is what I would call in my management consulting days, best practice. We had a storm, Florence and Matthew. We knew what the state and local governments needed. We got it out without any delay. Now, under Noem's leadership, which is supposed to be more efficient, more effective, and more responsive to the disaster in western North Carolina and the other states that were affected, looked like the EKG of somebody who's having a heart attack. It makes no sense. This chart shows a comparison between FEMA obligations and outlays for Hurricanes Matthew and Florence under the first Trump administration with the FEMA obligations and outlays to date for the Helene under the second Trump administration. The data clearly shows that something is seriously wrong here. Under Secretary Noem's lack of leadership, FEMA has invented an entirely new set of bureaucracies, the likes of which I've never seen. And I'm in a state that deals with a disaster almost every season. We're about to have another one potentially this weekend, and we just are recovering from an ice storm last weekend. And I've got this to deal with. What do I tell my citizens of Western North Carolina? The result has not been the elimination of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal disaster spending. Instead, Secretary Noem's new review processes have indefinitely prolonged disaster recovery efforts across the country and inflicted needless pain onto already vulnerable communities and people. Yesterday in my office, I was notified that FEMA released more than $233 million in Helene-related reimbursements. They're approved to move to North Carolina. This is great news. And these resources are severely needed in Western North Carolina. However, when you dig into the details of an announcement, it becomes clear that this money is long overdue. Again, this list is just from yesterday's announcement alone. $200 million for North Carolina Emergency Management as partial reimbursement for their emergency expenses incurred in the first 6 months of Helene. Folks, we're well past 6 months, meaning this is only part of what the state is owed before March of 2025. We're in 2026, folks. Nearly $9 million for the Blue Ridge Electric Cooperative for repairing and replacing electric and fiber infrastructure. Great, glad to see it come. For comparison, this is roughly equivalent to what Blue Ridge Electric spent on fiber for the entire year in 2023. $1.8 million for the town lake. This is one I hope people pay attention to. $1.8 million for the town of Lake Lure to rebuild its marina and docks. For those that don't know, Lake Lure is some of the most iconic scenes that you're going to find in the movie Dirty Dancing. That's where that movie was filmed, out in Western North Carolina. The entire economy depends on access to the lake through the marina. The Corps of Engineers recently finished removing more than 1 million cubic yards of debris just from the lake itself. After losing more than a year of tourism revenue, the town hopes to reopen the lake and the marina at some point in the spring or summer. This one award represents more than 20% of the town's general fund budget for this fiscal year, and it's just coming. $22 million for the NCDOT for road repairs. Again, much needed funding, but to put things in perspective, I don't know if you've not been through Western North Carolina, I-40 is a 2-lane road now. It is not, it was down to a single lane at one point. We've managed to get 2 lanes. Everybody thought it was going to be done in a year and a half. I told everybody they're crazy. Now it looks like it's going to be 2027. It's going to cost $2 billion, twice what we thought it was, and we hope it gets open by 2027. It's trending more by 2028. So think about that. A major interstate section, a major economic corridor between my state and the presiding officer's state of Tennessee is at a trickle right now. That's the sort of damage we're experiencing every day in North Carolina. And yet, I've got a Secretary of Homeland Security who thinks at one point FEMA shouldn't even exist, and now running the organization like some amateur. So moving from yesterday's funding approvals, I want to share the plight of one of the 39 Helene-impacted counties in North Carolina, Yancey County. It's home to some of North Carolina's most cherished natural resources, including Mount Mitchell. If you want to win a bar bet, ask somebody what's the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. They're probably going to say Mount Washington or somewhere up in New England. It's actually in the great state of North Carolina at almost 6,700 feet, a little over. But Yancey County was at the epicenter of Hurricane Helene's impact in North Carolina. There's a good chance that if you remember any of the devastating images of the aftermath of Helene, you're probably thinking about Burnsville, the Yancey County seat. To date, Yancey County has incurred $50 million in debris removal, cost alone for hurricane, far exceeding the annual budget of the county of $37 million. You would think that today, more than 16 months after Helene, Yancey County would have received significant amount of funding from FEMA to help recover from some of this historic devastation. Well, you'd be wrong under the so-called leadership of Secretary Noem. As of today, Yancey County received a grand total of $5.7 million from FEMA, remember, we're talking about a $50 million debt right now, a $50 million deficit in a small county. $5.7 million. Of that, only $3 million of it was for debris removal. In fact, Yancey County has not even been approved for a $5 million community disaster loan that the county began application process for in October of 2024, after the hurricane impact. The county was told just last week that FEMA should have an answer for them by June of this year. Good on you, Secretary Noem. 2 years late. More than a year and a half after the storm, folks. This is completely unacceptable and sadly just wrong. So, Mr. President, it's not a secret that I have problems with the Secretary of Homeland Security and the way that her failed leadership has led to unconscionable results in Minneapolis. I thank the President for putting an adult in charge who actually knows law enforcement by having Mr. Homan go there. He's going to lower the temperature. He's going to keep the law enforcement officers safe. He's going to make Minneapolis safer. Thank God we have adult supervision here. But another part of the Secretary of Homeland Security job is disaster response. And I cannot tell you enough how incompetent, based on the facts, that she is on that score as well. The people of Western North Carolina, the people of Eastern Tennessee, the people of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida who were affected by Helene deserve better. No reasonable business person would accept this in the C-suite. She needs to get out of the C-suite. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from West Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 6 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this week, as this is no news flash here, a major storm, winter storm, brought snow, sleet, frozen rain, and bitter cold temperatures to most of the middle and eastern parts of the country. I rise today to really highlight the dispatchable baseload power, coal, natural gas, and nuclear, what the role that those items played in keeping the 200 million Americans impacted by this winter storm safe and warm. Common sense tells us that in the peak heat of summer or the depths of a winter cold, we're going to consume more electricity. Americans expect, and very reasonably, that our country's energy policies will result in affordable and reliable electricity so that they can keep their homes cool in the summer and warm in the winter. If we know that that demand for electricity is at its peak during times of extreme heat or extreme cold, such as we're experiencing, I think it was 6 degrees this morning, then it would make sense that our energy policy would prioritize those generation sources that are available to meet the demand when electricity is needed the most. So which sources of energy showed up this week? Not surprisingly, fossil fuels and nuclear power provided the bulk of electricity during this week's storm and the intense cold that has followed. PJM interconnection is the electric grid operator in all or parts of 13 states, including my state of West Virginia, that were impacted by this winter storm. In a filing with the Department of Energy, PJM projected that its highest ever winter peak electricity demand would take place on Tuesday morning of this week. At 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning, fossil energy sources, including coal, natural gas, and oil, provided 2/3 of PJM's power, and another 23.6% of that was nuclear power. So that means that at a time of record winter electricity demand, 90% of the load was shouldered by baseload energy sources. And electricity is just part of the story, because natural gas is also used for residential heating in many of the same areas, providing energy beyond what is reflected in energy generation sources. This chart here really shows, it's from the Energy Policy Resource Foundation, and it shows the PJM electricity generation by source for the past week. It illustrates just what I've said, that fossil fuels and nuclear carried the load across PJM throughout this week's winter storm and its aftermath. The solid blue here represents nuclear. It stayed solid, like you would a baseload energy resource. Similarly, the red shows the reliable supply of electricity from our coal plants. You see it fluctuates a little bit, but it's still very steady and very meaningful. And the green shows electricity produced from natural gas, the largest single source in the PJM region. Here's the green. At the very top, what you see here is you see the relatively small amount of electricity produced from wind, solar, and hydroelectric sources. What is notable is not just that the renewable sources generate smaller amounts of electricity, but see how sporadic they are. This is through a whole week here of the last storm that we just had. So you can see from the chart that solar energy, which is yellow, basically disappears at night, of course. And then on Saturday, we had all that cloud cover, and again, or Sunday, cloud cover too from the snow, no generation. Wind power produced more on Friday. Wind is the blue on Friday, but then it basically disappears on Saturday because the wind wasn't blowing. So I highlight this chart not because I want to pick winners and losers on our energy resources. To the contrary, I believe all types of energy, all of this, including renewables, should be part of our energy mixture. But our country must have enough dispatchable baseload energy, that's from green on down, the type of reliable power that fossil fuels and nuclear provided if we're going to stay warm in a situation such as this or in the depths of the winter. The Biden administration, like the Obama administration before this, did everything possible to shut down our coal fleets. The Biden EPA had an entire strategy for pursuing multiple regulations, and I'll just name a few of them. Clean Power Plan 2.0, ELG rules for power plants, coal ash regulations, unachievable particulate matter rules, ozone rules, and the MATS rule, all to make it impossible to keep a coal plant open. As the Wall Street Journal editorialized on Monday, coal is an especially valuable part of our grid during periods of peak winter demand because months of fuel can be stockpiled on site at a plant. We see this all over West Virginia because we have not just the resource but the power generation from it, and it can be used to supply more electricity when natural gas is also needed for residential heating. On the oil and gas side, the Biden administration imposed a natural gas tax designed to make energy more expensive for consumers. The administration canceled the Keystone XL pipeline and, working with their allies and state governments, stood in the way of pipelines that could move abundant natural gas produced in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio to gas-starved areas in our Northeast and in our Southeast. I was very proud of the bipartisan work that we did in passing the ADVANCE Act to make nuclear licensing more efficient. But even that overwhelmingly bipartisan bill took years longer to pass because of a handful of Democrat opponents. So I'm glad that we had sufficient dispatchable power to make it through the winter storm this week, but I'm not convinced we would have if we had continued the Biden administration radical opposition to the energy sources that people rely on to keep them warm in the winter and cool in the summer. I appreciate President Trump and EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, Energy Secretary Chris Wright, and others across the administration for their common sense approach to regulation that allows us to keep producing and utilizing the energy resources that we need, especially during periods of peak demand. So going forward, I will continue working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to lock in common sense permitting reform so that projects of all types, including sources of dispatchable baseload electricity, can be permitted through a fair and efficient process. So I'm going to switch gears here to another hat that I wear, and I want to talk about another topic, and that is the progress that we've made in restoring a functioning appropriations process and the critical importance of the work before us. But first, I would like to thank our appropriations leaders, Chair Collins and Vice Chair Murray, as well as Leader Thune. I applaud them for their steadfast commitment to return to regular order, and I'm glad to see that our work has brought these bills to the Senate floor. In particular, I'm proud of the work that we accomplished in a bipartisan fashion in my Labor, Health, and Human Services Education and Related Agencies bill. It's a big bill. I'd like to thank all of my fellow committee members for their input. We received 12,000 total member requests for this bill. As Senator Baldwin and I began our 4th year this year of working on this subcommittee together, I'm pleased that we were once again able to bring forward a bipartisan bill that reflects the targeted investments, disciplined decision-making, and a shared commitment to meeting the needs of the American people. The Labor H bill allocates limited taxpayer resources to key bipartisan priorities, and it does so at a lower level than we did in fiscal year 2025. In fact, it decreases the base discretionary cost of the bill by $3.2 billion compared to fiscal year 2025. To achieve this, the bill reduces or eliminates funding from more than 40 programs and activities and realigns spending to reflect Republican values and priorities while continuing to deliver on areas where agreements exist across the aisle. The bill includes a number of member priorities, such as greater investments in America's biomedical research, child care, mental and rural health, workforce development, and continued efforts to combat the opioid epidemic. As we work to right-size the federal government, the bill also includes targeted decreases in administrative funding, while ensuring that our agencies have appropriate staffing levels to carry out their statutory responsibilities. We also preserve long-standing, consensus-driven policy provisions and reject the inclusion of any new controversial riders. That stability is really important, and not only for our agencies, but for our families, our workers, and communities counting on the programs that we authorize. A major priority in this bill is our sustained commitment to the National Institutes of Health. We provide funding for NIH to support life-saving biomedical research, which touches us all, and research that makes Americans healthier. It strengthens our economy and pushes the boundaries of what is possible in medicine. This investment includes targeted increases for research in critical areas, such as Alzheimer's, diabetes, Parkinson's, women's health, maternal health, rare diseases, and cancer. We also increased support for NIH's IDEA program. That expands the research capacity in 23 states, including my home state of West Virginia, and continues to be important for institutions like West Virginia University and Marshall University. The bill strengthens our efforts to combat substance abuse, an issue that still continues to affect many families and communities across the country, and my state most deeply. So we are supporting prevention, treatment, research, and recovery programs. If you look at the latest statistics, we're actually bringing the statistics down, but they're still way too high. We bolster support for rural health care programs. Rural America is tough to get health care affordable and accessible in some ways, but we're trying to increase access to care for more than 60 million Americans who live in rural areas. And critically, we maintain important conservative policy riders like the Hyde and Weldon amendments, ensuring the bill reflects longstanding bipartisan consensus. The Labor HHS bill focuses on our children, from early childhood through post-secondary education, ensuring that they're prepared for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. This includes critical infrastructures to help American workers upskill and to advance their careers. And we include funding for apprenticeship grants to support the Trump administration's goal of creating 1 million active apprenticeships. The bill's important to our country, but make no mistake, it's really important to my state of West Virginia. For our universities, our hospitals, dozens of nonprofits and workforce programs, treatments for our coal miners, and those suffering from opioid addiction. All of these things help my fellow West Virginians, and I know this because I hear directly from them about it every single day. My driving force in crafting this bill is to help meet those needs for my fellow West Virginians, and I'm proud to say this bill does just that. Mr. President, as encouraging as this progress sounds, our work is not done. The American people expect Congress to fulfill its most basic responsibility, funding the government responsibly and on time. Every delay undermines confidence in our institution and forces our agencies into wasteful, short-term planning cycles. Completing this work is not about a partisan victory. It's about good government. It's about keeping our commitments. It's about demonstrating that Congress can function and can work together to deliver real results. That is why we must come together to pass this package. And it ensures that the priorities that we've carefully crafted, debated, and agreed to on a bipartisan and bicameral manner can actually be carried out. So once again, I want to thank Chair Collins for her leadership throughout this process. I encourage all my colleagues to vote positively on the entire package. We saw earlier it didn't pass, but we still have negotiations moving so we can responsibly fund the government. This is what the American people sent us here to do. With that, I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Kansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to mark a solemn anniversary, one that continues to weigh heavily on the hearts of Kansans and families across this great nation. It was a year ago today that Flight 5342 left Wichita, Kansas, en route to Washington, D.C. But as we all know, it never reached its destination. 67 lives were lost, amongst them 7 Kansans. And certainly families were changed forever. Today we pause to remember those lives and honor their memory, and to stand with the loved ones who carry this burden every day. Mr. President, Kansans grieve together. And when tragedy strikes, we don't do it alone. We lean on each other, we lean on our faith, and we lean on our communities. But today we just want to remember those who were lost, remembering these were Kansans. They were sons and daughters, husbands and wives, parents, friends, and co-workers. And many were simply doing what so many of us do every day, traveling for work, for family, or to return home. The best way we can honor those we lost is by remembering them and learning from the tragedy. We've tried to ensure there was full accountability since this tragic accident. We tried our best to ensure complete transparency. And then take a look to the future to see what could we do for safety of future flights. And certainly we owe it to their families and to the memory of these loved ones to pursue these improvements and never forget why it matters. I recall a phone call early the next morning from the mayor of Wichita, Kansas, Mayor Lily Wu, and she asked me, and we have a good friendship. She said, "Roger, what can I tell the people of Wichita so that they know that it's safe to travel on this flight?" And she pointed out, this is the busiest runway in all of America. And she asked me, why was a military helicopter in that airspace? So I picked up the phone and I asked our Secretary of Transportation and our Secretary of Defense that same question. Why would a helicopter be in that airspace? And they, at that moment, or shortly minutes after that, they grounded any helicopters from being in that airspace. And then what did the Senate do? I'm so proud of what my colleagues have done. Senator Moran has helped lead the charge on that and many others. But we passed the Rotor Act out of the Senate, which would implement common sense reforms to ensure a tragedy like this never happens again. And I would hope that our colleagues on the House side would also pass this bill and we can get it to the President's desk. So just in closing, Mr. President, here we are a year later, and we're here to remember, to honor, and try to figure out the best ways to move forward. But at the end of the day, we want the families of those back home to remember that we've not forgotten about their loved ones and that their lives did matter. And I think I'd be remiss not to express gratitude to the first responders that we met that night out in the frigid cold, sacrificing their lives, diving into the chilly waters in hopes of finding someone who they could save. So thanks to all of our first responders. And finally, of course, we pray that God would continue to comfort the families who lost their loved ones. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield back.